Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to show you how to build this mid-century modern record player cabinet using some store-bought lumber, as well as Osborne's mid-century modern feet and mounting cleats. This project is super easy to build, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. So to start on this project, we're going to first begin cutting our lumber to a rough size. This just makes it a little bit easier to work with when we go to glue up our panels for our overall cabinet box. We chose to go with poplar for this project because we wanted a cost-effective wood type that still had that classic mid-century feel. Once we've got our pieces cut into more manageable sizes, we're going to go ahead and just figure out the exact orientation that we want each panel to look like. Occasionally with store-bought lumber, you may run into some issues with cupping or bending in your boards. We had a slight bend in our board, so what we're going to do is set up our router table to act as a joiner since we don't have a joiner in our shop. So this setup is very easy. To do this, we'll first remove our outfeed fence and just clean up on the tracks as some sawdust can get trapped over time. Next, we'll just take some 1/16 inch thick washers and just add them to the back of that outfeed fence. This is going to add a proper spacing on my outfeed just to make sure that my board is not going to move and it's going to stay on plane, similar to how a joiner would. This is necessary in order to keep the board square as it's pushed through the infeed side against the flush trim bit. For our fence, we want the outfeed side of our fence to be flush with the beginning of that flush trim bit. That's going to leave the space on our infeed side, as you can see here, just to make sure that we've got that proper gap for when we're feeding our board through. As always with a router table, you want to make sure that you're keeping your hands away from that blade as far as possible and using push sticks whenever you can. It's important to remember that we can only square up one side of the board on the router table. Once we get that edge squared, we can take it over to our table saw and use the fence of our saw and the square edge we just created to rip the board down. I'm ripping 3 boards at 5 inches wide to make an overall panel of 15 inches, which will be the exact depth of our cabinet. Once we have those ripped down, we can go ahead and glue our panels up. To glue up our panels, we want to add glue to each seam that's going to be joined together. We can add a bead of glue to each edge and then smooth it out with either a scrap piece of wood or a glue spreader. This just ensures that the glue has proper coverage and is going to squeeze out well whenever we go to clamp. Now that we've got glue applied to each edge, we want to go ahead and put the boards in the correct orientation that we marked earlier. I also like to add a clamp over the top side to prevent the board from warping while it's drying. Once I'm satisfied with the glue up, I'll let both panels dry and get ready for sanding. I'll start by removing the excess glue squeeze out with a scraper. This just makes the process faster and ensures that it's not going to wear out my sandpaper quick. I'm really just sanding the seams here with 150 grit sandpaper. You can also see I'm using a belt sander here for the higher spots and more stubborn glue areas. This is a great tool, but it does remove a lot of material, so you have to avoid focusing on one area for too long and work quickly. Once we've got our board sanded and the glue removed, we can go ahead and square off those edges, and that gives us a perfectly square panel to start pulling our measurements for our overall cabinet. The overall dimensions for our cabinet are 35 inches long, 15 inches wide, and 13 inches tall. With the wheeler legs installed, we'll have an overall height of 24 inches on our cabinet. All I'm doing is cutting each panel to size and getting ready to join them together. Now we are just going to be using butt joints with this project since we are using a store-bought lumber that has some minor imperfections in the wood. To help with alignment, we're going to use pocket holes on each side panel. I'm going to add 3 to the top and 3 to the bottom of each side. This just allows us to install it straight to our top and bottom pieces and makes attachment much easier. Now that we're ready to assemble our overall cabinet box, I'm first going to mark the top and bottom panel to keep things organized, and then I can just go and install screws into those pocket holes. This is where those come in handy and make attachment much easier. I can also use a clamp just to pull things back into square if they're slightly off, and just get rid of any kind of slight bow in the wood. Once I've got these sides installed onto my bottom panel, I can flip that assembly over onto my top and go ahead and install all of the pocket screws. It's important to make sure that this box is square because it will cause problems later on with your cabinet doors if it's not. Once our box is assembled, we'll sand at 220 grit and move on. The next step for our project is to begin working on our cabinet grille. This is going to act as the door for our cabinet. It is going to feature our half rail molding, part 892060. We're going to first cut out some scrap 1x2 lumber to use as the frame for our door, and then we can pull our measurements for how long we want to cut our molding at. Now I've chosen to make my cabinet door about half the width of my box. Now what I'm going to do is leave an 1/8 inch short just to make sure that I'm not going to interfere with my hinges when I go to install. Now I've got 33.5 inches of interior space in my box, so I'm going to cut 8 pieces of this molding at 16 5/8 just to leave that 1/8 inch short to make sure that I'm going to have plenty of room when I close my door. Once I've got my molding sticks cut, I can go ahead and start laying them out onto my 1x2 lumber. I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to each stick as I put it down just to act as a clamp so that I can flip it over and add some staples to the back. This is going to make sure that the molding sticks are secure whenever you go to pull the door to open the cabinet whenever you need to. I've also created some spacer blocks using my spare molding just to make sure that I have proper gaps between each molding piece and making sure that my grill is going to look parallel and uniform whenever it's all said and done. This will depend on your project dimensions, so be sure to take those measurements into account whenever creating your spacers. Once that glue is tacked up, I can flip it over and make sure that I'm square, and then just install some staples, making sure that they're not too long to bust through the front of my grill. This is just going to make sure that the molding pieces are secure when you go to pull the door open. Once we've got that done, we're ready to go ahead and apply a coat of stain to our entire project. To install our cabinet door, I've chosen just a small decorative hinge. I'm going to install these just 1 inch from the top and bottom of our door. Now I'm going to make sure and mark and pre-drill these holes and just install with a screwdriver instead of a power drill to avoid splitting my wood. I'm also going to lift the box on its side using some scrap pieces of molding to make sure that it's parallel with the thickness of our door, and just mark those out and install with a screwdriver as well. One final piece of hardware that I want to add to this project is just a magnetic door catch. We picked both of these pieces of hardware up at our local hardware store, so you can probably find something similar near you. The next step for our project is to install our mounting cleats and our wheeler legs. Now we have the 14-inch angled version here, but we also have a straight version as well. Both of these mounting cleats are available in multiple lengths and wood types. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in checking out some more information on those. We're going to make sure to pre-drill each hole just to avoid cracking our wood once again, and then we'll just install a proper length screw. You want to make sure that the length of your screw is appropriate to the thickness of your lumber to avoid drilling through the top. Once we've got our cleats installed, we can go ahead and screw in our wheeler legs. Now we opted for the hanger bolt install service, which is an optional service from Osborne. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in more information on that service. The final step for this project is to add a backboard to the back side of our cabinet. This is going to make it easier to hide cables and make the overall presentation a lot nicer. We're just going to cut some scrap backboard that we have from our previous project down to the correct size and just leave it slightly shorter on each edge. Once I have it sized properly, I can just place it onto the back side of my cabinet and just install using some staples that we used earlier. Now that our cabinet's complete, let's go ahead and take a closer look. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. I really love how this record player cabinet turned out, and I think it fits that mid-century modern space perfect. Now these parts, as well as the full mid-century collection from Osborne, are on sale for the entire month of February 2024. You can reference the link down below in the description to check out the sale. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment if you have any ideas for future builds, and we'll see you next time in the Builder Studio.